Initially, thank you very much, members. Thank you very much, Brian. I'm asking Owen Keegan to again refuse this planning application. St Paul's is not a suitable lands for this type of development. I was, on behalf of the Lord Mayor and as chair of the North Central Area Committee, I met with the Chief Minister of the Isle of Man yesterday, and the Isle of Man has been designated a UNESCO biosphere, and they came over here to see how we are educating our population and educating our citizens around the protection of the biosphere, the understanding of the biosphere. So they came to St Anne's Park to understand and to get, I suppose, some kind of information from us so that they can progress their biosphere. So I suppose at a time, Manager, when we are proposing to spend something in the region of 10 million on an interpretive centre to educate the people of Dublin and further afield on the importance of the biosphere, and St Anne's being an integral part of that as a buffer zone to the biosphere, it is an absolute travesty if this planning application was to go ahead. And it's a complete contradiction to what we as a local authority are trying to do. We're trying to encourage people locally to come on board and agree to an investment of taxpayers' money to educate us around the importance of what this planning application is proposing to absolutely destroy. And please, Manager, please ask our Chief Executive to take into account, and I know they have really strong views on it, Les Moore and Marianne Harris, who are hugely dedicated to the protection of the biosphere, to take their views on board and make sure that An Bord Pleanála is left in no doubt as to the importance of these lands which are integral to St Anne's Park. Clontarf GAA is strongly against the proposal, as are Raheny GAA and other clubs. These lands were disposed of to St Paul's on the basis that they would be used for educational and sporting activity. It is not, in my reading through the records, they were not disposed of so that huge damage could be done to the park. Huge damage could be done to the natural environment. And the fact that the developer has completely and utterly refused to ensure that the grass is cut so that a protected species of the light-bellied brent geese would be displaced is completely and utterly unacceptable. We know that there are protected species. There are other birds that are protected, but particularly the brent geese, who need these fields, these lands to graze on when the tide is in. Otherwise, they're completely and utterly displaced. That's a huge part of the reason that we are objecting, certainly that I am objecting. There's a lot of people who have said to me in the past, for God's sake, you know, Deirdre, people who are, I think, uneducated about it, why are you trying to protect birds as opposed to building homes for people? But that's completely not the issue. They are integral to our quality of life. It's not simply about protecting birds, it's protecting our quality of life, which is, in this day and age, we're all hugely, hugely concerned about, and they are protected species. They're part of the natural biosphere, and that is why they are so important to the reasons that we are given to the Chief Executive to completely and utterly reject this planning application. I'm going to invite speakers, Councillor Stocker, Councillor Cooney, and then Councillor O'Farrell.
So just to say, obviously, Deirdre, I very much echo the comments you've made there. We need to be calling on the Chief Executive to reject this in the strongest possible terms. I think the developer's approach here has been enormously cynical. I think, you know, it is clear in the development plan that the zoning of this land, the Z15 zoning, is for institutional and community uses, was never intended to be developed in this way. And it's another attack on the development plan and the intentions of councillors in terms of their plans for the area. You know, I won't go back over what Deirdre said, but obviously the local sports clubs are, you know, intently opposed to this. The local residents' associations are intently opposed to this. Migratory birds are a species of particular concern in terms of conservation and protection internationally, and we should be doing our utmost to support those efforts of conservation rather than, you know, riding roughshod over them, essentially. So, you know, I think we have a fairly unified voice from the representatives of the area that this is just not, you know, the detail is almost irrelevant. The 9 stories, the 5 stories, the what does it look like? This is not a site that should be developed for residential use.
Councillor Cooney.
Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and thank you for the presentation. And I think it's interesting that they didn't have the other views. And I would question even the models that they have there in terms of the impact of the views, because, you know, the type of mature trees we have there, you know, we don't have huge big Scots pine trees. There would be average, you know, the highest would be about 80 foot. So, I mean, taking the fact that they're probably about 9 foot each apartment, the height from floor to ceiling, you know, you're talking about at least 110 to 120 foot. So I don't see how they were in any way not viewable, you know, over these trees, because I haven't seen some, you know, extraordinary trees that we have there in the park. We do have some beautiful trees, shingle oak and everything, but they're no way over, you know, 120 foot high anyway. So that I would find that is incorrect, and, you know, it's made to make us feel that somehow they're camouflaged. You know, if you look at the facade, you're walking down the avenue there, that whole area that whole thing is, as a park, is very historical. It's where the building was, and it was laid out as a park to have that view and to have that facade when you come in, and it completely affects that in terms of the integrity of the park. There's no point saying that these lands are separate from the park just because they're at the back of St Paul's School. They're not, because they're part of the actual park. You walk in and you will see them on the left, and it'll affect the whole integrity of the park. On the environmental issues and the environmental impact statement, it is not good enough to say that there are other feeding grounds. We've had, you know, other developers stating there's other feeding grounds and they can go and find another. That is not true. They particularly pick particular areas for a reason. They can't be displaced, and, you know, it's not part of the EU Habitats Directive to say that somehow you can, you know, anyway mitigate by displacing them. They haven't found another site. They're saying let the geese find another site themselves, and that's just not good enough. You know, evict the geese, off you go. And you know, and then in terms of the curlew and saying that they're an endangered species. All birds are protected under the Wildlife Act, but a curlew are a particularly endangered species. So any displacements of their habitat would be completely contravene EU directives and our own National Wildlife Act. So I think we need, and in lesser extent, the black-tailed godwit. They also, in terms of mentioning the bats are also habitat there, and this will be what we now have as a dark area will be a light polluted area, which will affect the bats. So it will be completely displace the bats. There's also a badger set close by. So we have a lot of wildlife in that particular area which have not been taken into consideration with this. And even in the design of the buildings, there's absolutely no regard for the fact that it's, you know, in an area of special amenity, in an area that's in the buffer zone of a special amenity area, and that must be considered under the Habitats Directive as well. You've got glass atrium, which might be very nice for the people living there if it was in a different location, but not in the location of the flight of birds path. They'll go straight into that glass atrium on either side, and it just isn't, you know, it isn't this, it's in danger, unacceptable, a danger to birds. Also, the issue of drainage and the SUDS directive. There's, you know, quite a lot of coverage of that land now. That at the moment we do have a lot of. You know, some of the playing pitches are not playable at the moment in St Anne's Park because of drainage issues. So we do have drainage issues on St Anne's Park, and I don't think that it's suitable to put any more hard surfacing onto St Anne's Park. It'll put more pressure then on the Nanakin River, which will end up then flooding and being displaced and onto the road and other parks. So there are many reasons we should reject this application, and the fact that, you know, that they can contravene, if they decide to contravene the development plan again on Bord Pleanála in exceptional circumstances. This is not exceptional because we have Z1 zonings and we are looking at industrial zonings to put them into Z1. So there are other sites that are possible, and it is not something that is essential infrastructure for Dublin City that cannot be. So it's within the context that it's not part of our objectives of our development plan, and it should be rejected forthright. And I think that I recommend the Dublin City Council on all those points would reject this.
Thank you, Councillor Damien O'Farrell.
Thank you, and thank you very much for the presentation. And I thank the fellow councillors, and I want to agree with all the points that my fellow councillors have made. And I'm looking for the manager to robustly reject this planning application. And I just could we go to, I don't want to go over all the points again, but just could we go to the slide for the Natura impact statement? Could you go on to that slide, please? Take your time. It's just that at the pre-planning meeting, on Bord Pleanála brought the attention of the developer to 3 or 4 points, major points. Yeah, 3 or 4 major points, and one of the things was the view to St Anne's, and we could see there, not this thing, but we could see there previously we had a map with all the vistas, all the visual points, and it was like quite self-serving because they didn't have any visions from the north side, which is quite which, as I said, you've taken that into account. But this Natura impact statement, like, I'm looking for the management to robustly challenge this statement. This is self-serving as well. The 4th point there, the developer and the Natura impact statement is admitting, like, the loss of the ex situ habitat. There's admitting it, that's gone. And you can't just extinguish bird habitats. That pays no regard to the EU habitat directives. You just can't just extinguish. We should extinguish the bird sanctuary down in the lagoon, then would be the next thing we would do. So I'd like you to challenge that impact statement, to put resources into that and put professional people in to have a look at that, to concentrate on that statement and just try and challenge everything. It's very self-serving. The geese, like, a lot of that information comes, I think, from one season, 2 surveys. There would be over several years before you could find you know, the movement of geese, what they're doing. It would take several years to come up with a proper study, and they just have a quick study, not loyal to any one feeding inland site. But if we're going to be removing sites, and I would contend that site has been interfered with, and the grass hasn't been cut, the gates have been locked, and no one has been allowed to go in there and cut the grass and tend the site. It's just been ignored. So they're just totally ignoring the EU habitat site and totally just ignoring the directive. And I think that's what my main point in this is to challenge that impact statement, because it's just totally self-serving. And the other councillors mentioned about the sports clubs now coming on board. I think that's a big point. Now, Bord Pleanála didn't mention it in their points, but I think it's a little bit different now because the Z15 is community use, and the community now is coming together, the sports clubs and all. And there's a loss of pitches. That we had an inventory there of pitches about a year or so ago, and we're not getting any new ones. And all those clubs are growing. I think the Clontarf Football Club are, I think, at the time of the last development planning applications, were the 4th biggest soccer club in Dublin. They're all growing, and the pitches, we're not getting any new ones. So I think that is important on the Z15, that Board Pallola didn't point it out, but I think we should point it out. And the drainage then, we're losing that soakage area. And the home oaks are down there south of that, and that's all water, all drainage in for them, and I think they could be negatively impacted, and I want that mentioned as well. They're I don't want to take up time, so that's just on a point of information. We will get to see the synopsis of this. Like, we'd like to see this before the managers, before this meeting, before it goes to the manager, to see. Yeah, to see to be clear that we've
so
put
members will see the manager's notes to the chief executive before it's decided. Yeah. Okay.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank
so,
you,
Councillor Murray, and then Councillor Horgan-Jones.
Thanks very much, and thanks to Brian for putting the presentation together. I mean, there's a huge amount of work in actually just extracting what is really complicated out of the website. I know it comes in separately, so it's very useful that it's here. I found it really difficult to get my head around what's being proposed based on the website that's up there. Chair, I actually want to agree with you fundamentally, and I want to second your proposal in terms of rejection, because I think this comes down to how serious we are about the biosphere, how serious the City Council is about the biosphere, because this tampers with the biosphere. And we all know where the biosphere is, and there's a lot of pride within Dublin City Council and within the area at large about what is an evolving biosphere. And if we're going to, this application tampers with it. Let's be very clear about that. So it comes fundamentally, from the CEO, it comes fundamentally to that point. Are we going to allow the biosphere to be tampered with, or are we going to maintain and enhance and develop the biosphere? And we can, like, the CEO can talk to parks. We know parks, DCC parks, feel very strongly about the biosphere, and rightly they should, because they're proud of it. There's a few other things. It's disappointing that those images are missing. I think the file's incomplete if they don't provide images looking down, you know, views looking down from the northern side. The entire northern element of the site has not been showed in terms of montages and how it would look. And in fact, a lot of the other things, a lot of the points that we raised in the last SHD, you know, in our assessment, they're still relevant. They're still just as relevant now as they were then. What the developer has done is effectively reconfigure the site and add height to certain areas, but that's it. The basics and the fundamentals of the proposal and impact on the local area remain the same. A couple of things, just to remind ourselves again, because I want these on the record, of the issues the last time. Inappropriate use of Z15 zoning. This is institutional land for institutional and community use. As far as I'm concerned, biosphere is community use, perfect community use, not development like this. Still an issue. Loss of existing amenity to existing users. Damien's already mentioned very clearly sports clubs have been discommoded. This was a hugely used location for local clubs. No solution. Huge pressure on St. Anne's Park. Dublin City Council planners themselves highlighted this issue in terms of, in a previous application, in terms of providing, how will the applicant provide those facilities an alternative? Not done. Facility locked away, no access, doesn't make it. Damage to we've already covered the biosphere, the damage to the geese, to the curlew, an awful lot of biosphere related issues. But for me, and again, Councillor O'Farrell has highlighted there, that to me, like that's just a bundle of assertions by the applicant in their own interest. That's all they are, all right? It's like they interviewed the geese and they interviewed the curlews and got their opinions. That's all it is. I don't see any data, any information, any studies of any substance whatsoever to back any of that up. Now, I'm perfectly happy to be corrected on that, but I have my doubts as to whether that data is in the file. And the file is hard enough to extract out in the first place. Okay, just the drainage has been mentioned, traffic congestion has been mentioned, but again, Chair, it comes back to the fundamental point which I would like to second and state again. If we are serious about biodiversity, and if we're serious about the biosphere, this is tampering with the biosphere and it should be rejected. Thank you.
Gurmagat Corler, Councillor Jane Horgan-Jones and then Councillor Darrell.
Thanks, Chair. I want to join with my colleagues and to say that I think this is an extreme overdevelopment of this site. The type of development proposed is not suitable in respect of the zoning objective as set out in the development plan. And I think it's worth noting that once again it appears that all councillors in the ward are united in their view of this, and if there is to be effect given to the democratic process, I would expect those views to be reflected and mirrored in the Chief Executive's report, because the difficulty, I suppose, with these applications, and I want to touch on it in more detail a little bit later, is that there is a democratic deficit in that somehow, despite the fact that all councillors are agreed, you can have a situation where permission is granted for this type of development, irrespective of the fact that it rides roughshod over the development plan and the heights as agreed by local councillors in a very long, drawn out and considered process in the development plan. I have a couple of queries in relation to the presentation, and thanks, Brian, for it. It's very comprehensive. But my first point is a kind of a technical one, so you might just bear with me. And I suppose, Brian, I'd be interested in your view on it, but it's something that I'd be inviting the Chief Executive to perhaps take some legal advice on, and to consider whether it's something appropriate for his own submission to An Bord Pleanála, or his report. We're all aware that the starting point, I suppose, for these strategic housing developments is the 2017 regulations, which indicate that an application can be made directly to An Bord Pleanála for planning applications for the development of 100 more units on land zoned for residential use or for a mixture of residential and other uses. My question is whether the zoning of this land, being Z15, meets that requirement in terms of whether the land is zoned for residential use or for a mixture of residential and other uses. Because if it isn't, it would seem that an application to An Bord Pleanála isn't in accordance with those regulations. And we can see, I suppose, the reasons for why that there may be a question mark over that if you have regard to the zoning objectives. So quite clearly, zoning objectives such as Z1, the zoning objective is to protect, provide and improve residential amenities. You can quite clearly see that that's for residential use or for a mixture of residential and other uses. And similarly, Z2, zoning objective to protect and or improve the amenities of residential conservation areas. But if you look at Z15, the objective is to protect and provide for institutional and community uses. And the permissible use doesn't include residential. It's only included as open for consideration use. And I think that is a difference which means the point is worth making. And you can see the difference between having residential as permissible versus open for consideration. If you look then at the definition of a strategic housing development in the Planning and Development Housing and Residential Tenancies Act 2016, hopefully I'm not going too fast, but I think it's a point worth making. So it sets out and defines what a strategic development housing development is. So firstly, as I said, we have the development of 100 or more houses on land zoned for residential use or for a mixture of residential and other uses. And then we have B, the development of student accommodation units, which when combined contain 200 or more bed spaces on land, the zoning of which facilitates the provision of student accommodation. So you can see how Z15 might qualify under the second limb of that test, where student accommodation is involved, if it supported institutional or community use. Possibly, I don't know, but we're not talking about student accommodation here. We're talking about residential accommodation, and I think there is a question mark over whether this falls under the definition of land zoned for residential use or for a mixture of residential and other uses. And it's something that I would like the Chief Executive to explore, perhaps in tandem with his legal his legal officials, because it's something that might form part of a submission to An Bord Pleanála. Then just query-based, you may have mentioned this, Brian, but I possibly missed it. What is the access route for the building of this development if permission is granted? Yeah, for the construction phase. How are materials going to be brought in and brought out? What if is it specified in the application what the plan is for that? Because we had myself and my colleague Senator Aodhán Ó Ríordáin held a very well attended public meeting and about this, and that was one of the queries raised. People are concerned now, particularly people, I should say, who have children in St. Paul's, want to know what the plan is in terms of the construction phase. Echoing what my colleagues have said then about the overall unsuitability for this type of development for Z15 zoning. And I want to make this point clearly because I am not anti-housing. I more than I'd like to admit, I'm aware of the difficulties for young people in buying their own home in this city. But being pro-building housing in this city doesn't mean giving developers carte blanche to do whatever they want with our green spaces, because we did that before, it didn't work. And oversight and objections or observations from politicians, while they're sneered at by some, they're essential. They're an essential part of our planning process, and we only have to look at the multiplicity of issues in terms of building regulations, fire regulations across the city at the moment to see how important it is that developers can't just do what they like, when they like, and where they like in the pursuit of profit. The final point I want to make, Chair, and I'm sorry for going on, is that, as I've said, there's a democratic deficit in terms of the height of this proposed development. We sat here in this very chamber, and local reps with local knowledge voted on maximum heights in our development plan. And in December 2018, the Fine Gael government decided in their wisdom to bring in new regulations which effectively said that developers were free to ignore those heights as set democratically by people elected by local residents with knowledge of the area. And it's no coincidence that this new application, which increases the height of the development up to 9 stories, has come in after those regulations have been passed. The message was sent by government and received by the developer that you can go as high as you want, wherever you want, and you'll be facilitated with that. And that's a difficulty, and people need to be aware of the chronology of events and in terms of how it is that we're here talking about this scale of a development. When even the last one, I think, was an overdevelopment of this site. So I suppose I'd like the Chief Executive to examine the technical point that I've raised about the application, and then just the query about the access route, and of course to support what my colleagues have said about the biosphere as well. Thanks.
Councillor Larry O'Toole, and then Councillor Darrell Byrne.
Thank you, Chair. And Chair, I think the views articulated by previous speakers and yourself, I would say, covers most or all of this. Excellent views. Now, I just have a couple of things. Look, in general, with these new developments coming in like this, where we really have no say, I think our powers are being rendered obsolete, to be quite honest with you. We're here now. We're seeing this today for the first time. Make an observation by Tuesday. We haven't got it where we can sit down and discuss it with our colleagues, with residents and all of that. The whole thing is very slipshod. Anyway, I'll get down to just a couple of the, and I will say, and the councillor mentioned about from the last proposal, there's an increase in most everything. I would say there's a slap in the face down from An Bord Pleanála, the council, and to ourselves. Just a slap in the face, an arrogant, we're going for it again and we'll get it eventually kind of attitude. I just want to go into one specific, and Councillor Cooney did mention on it, about the hard surfacing of so much grassland having an impact on the Nanican River. I definitely think it will. And as you know, Chair, and some of the councillors here know, we have been dealing with the Annigan River further upstream in Artane and Maryfield in particular for many years. I'm not sure, I think we may have it resolved now, but we're going to put pressure again on this river, which is a small river, but it's going to cause havoc. I think even Backup River now, and I don't know too much about what way it works, but that's the one specific thing that maybe not has been mentioned, that the backup on that river as we go further on. But I'd say thanks for the presentation for what it's worth. But can we have that presentation post haste, that we can discuss it among ourselves and with our colleagues, because it's fine and all looking here. I mean, Councillor Farrell, I think that's an excellent thing that Councillor Farrell pointed out. That's rubbish. That's fucking rubbish. All of that is rubbish. We go around the north side of the sea and we see them every yearly. We see the birds landing in the same places. There's one 50 yards aside from where I live on the Priorswood Road. They're there every year. And they're not coming back every second year, every third year. They come there every year. And that there is indicative of the arrogance and the rubbish that's been put out there. Thanks, Chair.
Gormagat, Darrell Byrne.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Brian, for your report. I do appreciate it. Now, what I would say is I concur with all my fellow colleagues here. All the councillors are correct in what they've said, and when we need to reaffirm this in the Chief Executive's report. As a former student of St. Paul's College, as a former head boy of St. Paul's College, I've been talking to a lot of my friends that I went to the school. You know, I played in these pitches, you know, for over 6 years of my life in secondary school. You know, it's actually appalling. It's actually a crying shame that we're seeing the green lung of the north side being built on, and it's not right. It isn't right. 9 stories, 7 stories, 6 stories. There should be no stories. This cannot go ahead. It's very, very clear to me that this has to be stopped. You know, I understand, and Jane Horgan-Jones Councillor Jane Horgan-Jones is correct. There is a housing issue here, you know, but the reality is we need, you know, to not be building on you know, here, full stop. You know, we need to be looking at other ways and other mechanisms to build in other parts of the constituency. Just in relation to the access, Sybil Hill Road, the transport links already is hemorrhaging. If you go down there between 7 and 9 o'clock in the morning, or 4 and 6 p.m, you know, there's cars parked on either side of the road already. Ardalon Court is already causing problems with traffic. If you add another 657 apartments, it's going to absolutely be at a standstill, and it's not on. You know, I remember when it was in school in second year in 2006, 2007 it was, you know, the swimming pool being closed, you know, and only up until recently the Ardalon Court's been finished. You know, again, more infrastructure being taken away just to help and promote, you know, the developers building more affordable, you know, more apartments, you know, locally. You know, what I can see there is, and I just want to see as well on the map as well, what I'm looking at there is the potential loss of the Block C of St. Paul's College. I might be corrected on that, but I can see there's roughly about 14 rooms in that school in Block C of St. Paul's College that looks like it's been cut off. So I could be corrected in a sense, but I would appreciate.
Do you know what the councillor is referring to in your slides?
The art block, Block C in particular, looks like it's been cut off. Correct.
There is the description of development refers to the loss of prefab.
Yes, it's a permanent prefab. We don't beat around the bush. That's been there for many years.
And what's that being used for?
It's been used for the art facilities. There's over 14 rooms in there. You know, what I would say is you know, the lack of potential for the school to grow now. If we lose that, you know.
What's that block referred to as?
The Block C is
Block
part
C.
is the school. You know,
Okay.
it is a school. You know, that is part of the school.
Okay, thank you.
You know, and that's something that needs to be seriously looked at as well. There's no ambition. It shows to me that the school is now lacking ambition to increase, you know, the capacity of students in the college. You know, and that to me is absolutely scandalous. You know, for this. So I would appreciate it. That's included in the chief executive's report. Drainage on the site. It's been quite clearly stated. There's a serious problem there now. You know, if we build on this, there's going to be serious drainage within, not only locally but in St Anne's as well for the other pitches. You know, it's been mentioned as well. I just reaffirm it. The biosphere, it's an important, you know, part of the biosphere. You know, Larry is right. The Brent geese, I remember in school there, the Brent geese used to land there every year, consistently, over and over. It's repetition. They know where they land every year. They don't just see, oh, there's a piece of greenspace and we just land here instead. You know, they land there. I remember quite clearly that, you know, we wouldn't go out on the pitches when they were there, and it was quite clearly directed by the school that we wouldn't go there. So if where are they going to go? There's nowhere else really to go. You know, they go there every single year. You know, I'm delighted to see the sports club, in particular Clontarf and Raheny GAA, and the other sports club locally. It's an attack. It is an attack on sports clubs in this city. It's an attack on our pitches in the city. As years go on and as more developments, we need to make a stand on it. It's very, very clear to me we need to make a stand on it, because if we allow this, other pitches are going to be taken away. As someone that has been heavily involved in sport all my life, you know, and played on these pitches, you know, it's not on. We're going to lose, and we're being squeezed all the time. And Councillor Demi O'Farrell is right. You know, other sports clubs in the area are crying out, screaming out for more pitches. We don't have it available to them. St Anne's is already oversubscribed. We don't have the pitches available to more clubs, you know, in the area, and that's something to me that really needs to be hit home with the chief executive's report. You know, again, and it could be reaffirmed as well. I don't know, is it potentially something that we down the line that we can do a compulsory purchase order act on this piece of land, because this is what's needed. We need to make a stand. We need to take back this into the ownership to stop this once and for all. It's gone on for too long. It needs to be taken back into the ownership of the city. You know, and stop this development. And I really appreciate that the councillors are united behind this, and we need to and strike this out and finish it for good. Thank you, Chair.
Gurmagat. Brian, will you come back on the specific question that Councillor Horgan-Jones asked about the access for the construction traffic during the proposed construction phase of this proposed development?
Well, there's quite a few questions being asked. Do you want me to go through all of them up until now?
Absolutely, sorry, but I was specifically, sorry, I beg your pardon, I was specifically interested in that one, but go through them all, absolutely.
Well, I'm trying to kind of keep a bit of a track on them, okay, in terms of what I would just say, that there was a point raised about the integrity of the park and views. What I would just say is that the applicant would refer to examples such as Herbert Park, and say that there's apartments that you can see from the park and it has not affected the integrity of the park. So there is a question mark here about St Anne's. For the most part, when you're in it, it's natural landscape. You can't see anything in the way of buildings apart from buildings for the park itself. And to what degree will seeing urban development change the character of the park? The applicant is arguing that it will not change it negatively or significantly so. In relation to, there was a point made about, in relation to AA, that there was bats and badgers, that this, as far as I'm aware, is addressed in the submitted environmental impact assessment report.
Sorry, can we just let Brian respond to us? Because you see, we have given our views. They have been noted. We're going to see those views before this chief executive, they're submitted to the chief executive. So he's just answering in terms of the questions that were raised.
Yeah. All I'm just trying to say is that, you know, the NIS takes a particular focus on the species of special conservation interests in relation to the Natura sites out in the bay. But I'm just saying that the impact on other species, such as bats and badgers, which might not have the Natura protection, are considered in the submitted documentation. Now, you may disagree with what they're saying, but they're not from the Natura 2000. So in other words, they're separate, because the Natura impact statement is very much considering what the impact is on the wildlife out in the bay, right?
Bats are protected under the habitat.
Okay, and I'm just saying, so because of that, it's in the EIAR, and they have addressed it. Now, you might disagree with what they're saying, but there is a reference to it in there. I take on board the points about the lack of views from the north in general, and that will be taken into account in the Chief Executive's report. A part of the difficulty, in a way, with the new process is that in a standard planning application, if issues like this comes up, we have the ability to ask for additional information, and I have no doubt we will be asking for views from specific places. In this particular case, all we can really do is point out that there is a lack of views, and they would have been helpful to inform the assessment of the development from that angle, and draw the board's attention to it. In terms of the NIS, I would just say, to be fair to the applicant, what I put up there was literally a summary of their points. If you do happen to see the NIS, it's a bit like a telephone directory. It's a very substantial piece of work, and there's no end of survey work in there. Now, you may disagree with it or question it, and indeed, it's been referred to our Parks Department, and we will very much take on board a report from our own biodiversity officer in terms of the accuracy of that NIS and a way to go forward. In relation to Councillor Horgan-Jones' question in relation to Z15, it's an interesting point that's raised. Under the Act, the board is not allowed to consider an SHD application on lands that are not zoned for residential. And I think really where that was coming from, there was a fear that what would happen is, if that didn't come in, that you might have proposals for SHD applications literally anywhere across the country, potentially on unzoned land, on rural land, agricultural land, anything, and everything will be up for grabs and will go straight to the board for assessment. So to try and put some shape on that provision went in. But in terms of our development plan, because residential is listed, admittedly not impermissible, but it is in open for consideration, it would be considered that it is one of the potential uses that you can have there. So I think the board, as they considered in the previous case, that it is something that SHD does apply to. Construction access, now I have to be careful here, because I could only get to look at so much of the scheme before we came here. It's yet to be assessed. What my understanding is, the construction access is going to be along the access road that you see there. Obviously it won't be finished at that stage, it will just be a construction access. And I also did see that the applicant had submitted a construction management plan, but I haven't had a chance to look at it yet. But that will be available online for anybody who wants to take a look. And usually what that would do is it would outline hours of work, the number of vehicles that are proposed, all that type of stuff will be in there and would be available.
It's the only possible access point in reality.
Yes.
Driving to the middle of the park or over somebody's
a point was made about the presentation. Obviously, we'd like to get these presentations out as early as possible. I've been honest, it was completed yesterday, so it would have been hard to get out before then. But certainly what I will do when I go back to the office, I'll PDF it and send it out to the area office for distribution.
Just on that, I suppose just to note, the Chief Executive's report isn't due to the 10th of December. Avril Feeney's here from the Planning Department, who is the lady who has the job of pulling together all your comments, accurately reflecting everything that has been said here by councillors today. Avril has said that she will take inputs up until next week. Do you want to?
Actually, what I might do is I might go back over the last set of notes that we had from the last one, and I might use them as well, plus all the comments from today. I'll circulate them then directly to yourselves, and if there's anything then additional or any changes that you want to make. Yeah, but I think it's probably fair enough to use the same. The same comments are coming up really from the last one, but obviously with the additional, I suppose, emphasis around the biosphere, etc. So I'll circulate them then, and maybe if you have them back, I'll try and get them done Monday, and maybe give you until Friday to come back with any additional comments. That's okay. Yeah.
I suppose.
Thank you.
When this is finished, the first thing I will do is I'll PDF it and I'll send it to the area office and it can be distributed this afternoon. The one caveat is that this is a very big file because of all of those images. That's why I'm saying I have to PDF it, and the reason for doing that is to try and get the file size down. My only question mark is it might need to be in two documents, but it'll be distributed today.
Thank you, Brian. Hold on, Manager.
Finished, actually.
Manager, are you finished?
Yeah, I suppose the only point I wanted to make, if there is some small additional things that come to mind in the interim period, just because it wasn't mentioned today, we're not going to say we're not taking it. Just bring it up and mention it to Avril, and we can include it as the process develops for the inputs.
Well, you can take it that the North Central Area Committee is in agreement that this planning application should be rejected, and we're asking the Chief Executive, Owen Keegan, to make his submission rejecting it. Thanks.
Just one small point, that as well as making the points that we would reject it on various points, as well as obviously the loss of habitat, but also the effect it would have even after the loss of the building on the existing the retaining habitat, that it would have a continual effect after that loss of habitat. You know, there would also be a continual effect in terms of, you know, the effect it would have on the wildlife in the area as a development. So it wouldn't only be that we would lose the habitat, but that it would have a continual effect on the other whatever remaining habitat that we have after this.
Can I just mention there was another couple of points there. It was in relation to St. Paul's School and the loss of accommodation. What they have done is, I think it's in the Z15 master plan, they've shown how there's sufficient space to expand the school. And they have had an architect take a look at it. Now, it's not a very substantial extension, but they say it's in consultation with the school, I don't know, governors or headmaster, and that there's sufficient space in there, and they've shown where you could put the classrooms. Okay, so I just to clarify that. In relation, that just one last point, it's in relation to the CPO. I think there was some suggestion of doing that. It's just saying in practical terms, it would be phenomenally expensive to do. I'm not saying you can't do it, but because when a CPO, what you're looking at doing, you're incorporating hope value. So from the developer's point of view, if they can acquire one of the permission, anything like what they have here now, or at least that's their hope, that's what's the rate that they would look to be bought out at, you know. So.
Councillor Farrell has a point. Gormargot. Just Councillor Farrell wants to make a point before we finish up.
Just to agree with Larry, thanks for the meeting, Deirdre. You looked after it very well, so thanks for that. Now, just the point I made at the start, just to clarify, I'm looking. We opposed this application before, and I'm looking for the city manager, the CEO, to aggressively to do everything we can to oppose this again. So the point that Councillor Horgan-Jones brought up about the legal, there might be a bit of a legal issue there, to get independent legal advice, the Natura statement to aggressively challenge it. Like, there's statements made there that I don't know are factually, who know, to challenge aggressively, do everything we can to stop this, to protect our buffer zone. Not opinions, to get in there and passionately and do it. That's what I'm looking for. Thank you.
Councillor Hemmings.
Also, can I just...
Sorry, Councillor Hemmings.
Oh, sorry.
Can you switch off the microphone?
I've just been working my way through some of the Natura impact statement here, which is a very long document. And it's been mentioned before, but it's interesting to note that apparently there's 52% of the available grassland suitable for light-bellied brent geese is not currently being utilised. That's quite an interesting point to make, and it seems that the NIS would suggest that displacement of these birds will allow these birds to find new places and new pathways, which is quite a convenient argument to make in the NIS here. And also, a reference is made to a 1990 study which says that there's 2,000 hectares of grassland available to geese. I did science myself for my master's. You would never, ever refer to a source that is 28 years old at this point. That's a disgraceful source to have in a Natura impact statement, and we should definitely challenge that. And finally, as a point, I think it's deeply cynical that the grass has been allowed to grow long. Deeply, deeply cynical. That is clearly an action taken by the developer or St. Paul's in order to get the results that they need in relation to the most recent surveys where, lo and behold, no light-bellied Brent geese are being found because it's not suitable habitat for them anymore. This is within the one of the best assets within the Dublin Bay Biosphere, designated by the United Nations, 5th most important park and one of the 5th in the world. This NIS is worth scraping through. I've spent 5 minutes looking at it and I've found some serious issues with it already. So just maybe we can put our own Dublin City ecologist or the ecology team on to have a look at this. NIS is the appropriate assessment process, all of this. The developer hires an ecologist, effectively, or an ecology team, to try and ensure that their development can go ahead by screening out all the issues. Light-bellied Brent geese was one of the issues that caused this to be moved from appropriate assessment to NIS. The NIS is a very long document where they try and do away with any of the issues that the original appropriate assessment has raised. And we definitely need to go through this, especially with the legal challenge.
Sorry, thank you very much, Councillor Hemmings. Councillor Donna Cooney and then Councillor Nisha O'Murray.
Yeah, I think I'd just like to come back here as well, and the fact that this did end up in the courts previously, and in this situation, if the Minister's brings in the legislation that he tends to, I would be afraid he would do that before Christmas. And that Minister's legislation will possibly prevent this being a judicial review, which is the only democratic way that environmental groups and community groups can actually challenge something that is bad development and that damages our environment. And I think we would, as local councillors, should strongly condemn that legislation, that proposed legislation, which alter the planning the planning laws and prevent this democratic means to take a judicial review against this. And I think we should put a statement out basically to say this is yet again another unravelling of democracy and another bad decision to really just be totally on the favour of developer and not on the favour of communities and the environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. The last speaker, I'll wrap it up, is Councillor Nisha O'Murray.
Yeah, thanks, Cahir. Look, just coming back to the Natura side of the House for a minute. So, Brian, you mentioned at the start, or early on in your presentation, that Bord Pleanála are the competent authority for assessing that. So, they may be so from a planning perspective, all right? But the City Council has plenty of expertise within parks and other areas in terms of biodiversity, the biosphere, natura, flora, fauna. We have a lot of expertise, and the City Council is entitled to have a position on that, all those issues, and to battle and to put the case from the point of view of the biosphere itself, because it is the city's biosphere. So, competent authority, be it as it may, even from a planning perspective, if that is within Bord Pleanála, we're still entitled, and we should be battling from that perspective, and the CEO should be battling from that perspective. I just want to reiterate Councillor Horgan-Jones's point as well in terms of the zoning, the Z1 versus Z15. I think we should examine that and make sure we get a view on that. It may very well be, Brian, in terms of what you've articulated, that's the way in Bord Pleanála will look at it. And zonings are different across the country anyway, so their definitions are different by local authority. So it'll be difficult to be consistent, but at the very least we should consider it and just assess it from a legal perspective. Thank you. And Chair, thank you for chairing the meeting so well.
Brian, thanks very much for the presentation. It's quite obvious that all of us on the North Central Area Committee are fully in favour of the manager rejecting and recommending rejection of this planning application. And just to say again that Les Moore, our City Park Superintendent, and Mary-Ann Harris are hugely dedicated to the protection of the Dublin Bay Biosphere. St Anne's Park as a buffer to the UNESCO designated biosphere is a huge part of what we're trying to educate people about. We're intending, as I said at the outset, to invest millions of taxpayers' money in an interpretive centre to educate the population around the importance of the biosphere. I certainly hope that Marianne Harris and Les Moore will be given, you know, all the time that they need to make, and any other professional officials that we have who could contribute to going through the NIS with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that every opportunity is given to us to impress upon those in on board Pleanála around the concerns that we have on the protection of the biosphere. So thank you very much. And members, we need to make sure that all the members of the public are aware that the last day for submitting an objection or observation, as it's referred to, on this strategic housing development application is the 19th of November. It's next Tuesday by 5:30, and any observations need to have €20 enclosed with them. And also that if any of us have any further views to put to the Chief Executive, that we can do so, and Avril will take them on board before putting our views from this meeting to the Chief Executive. All right, thanks very much, everybody.